Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. It's time to talk about the defense from that absolutely dominating first preseason win against the Eagles. Great night for football. One of the football New Year's. I normally really call the football New Year's the draft, but this is another major milestone during the football calendar in our lives. And great night at the bank, very comfortable temperature wise. Things had already gone well during the day. The Orioles got a win, and the Orioles, as I record this now at a little after 8:30 on Sunday night, have taken the lead in the American League wild card. No matter how brief that lead may be, it's an amazing place that they are at this point. Anyway, great night at the bank on Saturday night, and an absolutely stifling performance by the defense with some truly one-sided drive and conversion metrics. You've probably heard some of these by now, and I'm certainly going to go over a few of them. The Eagles went 0 for 9 on third down. That's 0 for 9. They did convert one fourth down late in the game, unfortunately on a missed sack that kept them from ending the game with 2 first downs. At that point, the Ravens led in first downs 30-2. The Ravens led in snaps for the game 76-40. Let's talk about that for a moment. That's a 36 snap advantage, obviously, which is ginormous. But the Ravens, that was their big problem last year. That was the issue, or one of the big issues with the team, is the offense was highly barbelled results. They were consistently losing snap count. Defense was not doing their part either. Don't get me wrong, but the Lamar Jackson-led offense in a year where he was very banged up was not grinding out first downs in the normal way. The offensive line was not, very good at all, frankly. And the Ravens had a very tough year with any kind of sustaining of drives. So to see them win 76-40, a lot of that, the offense was fine in the game. Don't get me wrong. They had drives of 9, 6, 7, 5, 9, 11, 7, 11, 9, and 4 plays. So they weren't three and outed even once the entire game. They had at least one first down on every single drive. And until the very last drive, when they weren't done, when the game ended, they had 2 first downs on every single drive of the game. That's very impressive. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Eagles had, by number of plays, 3-3-3, 3-8-2, 3-3-3, and 9 plays. They had only 2 drives where they had any first downs. They had 2 on a drive late in the first half, midway through the first half, or second quarter, I should say, where they had 2 first downs on a drive. They moved the ball 41 yards, and then they had 4 first downs on the final drive of the game when Cole Payton kind of took the game onto his own hands, and probably his life into his own hands too, running the football, escaping pressure in the backfield, and making some long run plays, in addition to a 15-yard mesh point play he had as well. So a very, very dominant game for the Ravens. They finished with a 31-6 advantage in first downs. And some of this is really strange because some of the individual statistics are not that one-sided. For instance, the Eagles rushed for 5.4 yards per play, but they made up for it by only passing for 3.2 yards per play. They had 96 yards on 10 penalties, while the Ravens had 3 for 25. The big difference there was the Eagles had 5 holding calls. And so some of their medium range pass plays, 8 and 12-yard pass plays, kind of didn't get them first downs anyway. So it was a big difference in a lot of categories in this game. The Ravens dominated very significantly. They did have 2 turnovers, and the Eagles didn't have any. So the defense probably, not feeling great about having no turnovers. And one of the 2 turnovers was kind of a bad one for the Ravens on a fumble by Surratt. I'll get into more of that on the offensive pod, but not the turnover differential they want to start with. That's really getting pretty minute in terms of things when you look at this win and the entire one-sided domination of it. So great play by the defense. I think if you look across at the units that did particularly well, the pass rush was not terrible by any stretch. They got a little bit of pressure, particularly in the first half. We'll talk about some of the reasons why they probably got less than they might have in a regular season game. but there was fantastic play from the defensive backs. Virtually every cornerback or safety stood out in some way during the game. They each made a play of some note, and pretty much every guy who played. The other thing I would point to is that the 2026 draftees were exceptionally good. Now, we would normally expect that. Hey, it's a preseason game. A lot of your playing time comes from first and second year players. That's in fact a higher percentage of your team anyway, but a high percentage of the playing time, because you sit out so many veterans in a game like this, comes from your first and second year players and the guys who aren't necessarily sure of making the team. That's why I really love doing these episodes and grading out the play from a number of guys who the real question is, are they going to be on the 53 maybe at the end, or the practice squad? And in a lot of cases, it's, are they going to be on the practice squad? Are going to be looking elsewhere for a job? And then, a few players, there's, hey, can the Ravens make use of this asset in some other way? Maybe a guy they could trade. It may be a guy that, they have a chance to slip on IR somehow under the old systems that exist. They have other guys who are potential handshake deals. They're really short on those this year, by the way, in terms of players who would actually make a handshake deal with them and then come back later. Like a Chris Moore kind of fits in the category, but they really don't have many. So anyway, the 2026 draftees, getting back to them, 8 of the 11 of them, as I count it, had a highlight play of some sort. And I'm just going to tell you who these guys are, because Venga Ioane only played briefly, and he didn't play particularly well, but he had one incredible help block during the game. Zion Young chased a guy down on a screen pass, and he also forced a false start. Didn't force it, but the veteran left tackle opposite him was so excited about not getting beat by him that he was cheating off the snap and false started. Jacoby Lane, you probably saw every highlight he had, but he great touchdown pass, another pass over the middle, looking like he can do a lot of the things a tight end would do. We saw Elijah Surratt make 6 out of 7 grabs in the game. He did unfortunately fumble on one of those. Not a great play, kind of holding the ball out in a chicken wing kind of style in his left arm, if I recall, and he got it punched loose by a trailing player, which is often the way that happens. But he made numerous good plays, go into the ground to get the ball a lot. Matt Hibner got behind the defense on the very second play of the game for a 29-yard game, and that's something I'd been really concerned about. I'll get to that in the offensive pod too. We saw Chandler Rivers come in the fourth quarter and play well. He had a pass defensed on 3rd and 3 that put the Eagles right to the wall in terms of 4th and 3, and that was, could have been a shutout at that point, and it could have been a game where the Ravens held the Eagles to just 2 first downs if they were able to convert that 3rd and 3 for a off the field. But unfortunately, they missed a sack on that play and gave up a big play on a I think it was a 17-yard scramble. Josh Cuevas, he didn't have a big play. He did have an 11-yard catch on 3rd and 17. That doesn't meet the standard for me. But he played, and he blocked, and he did some things that were positive, and I think he's established himself in some better ways. Adam Randall had a touchdown run. He had a couple other good runs also, but the touchdown run was his primary one, where he really ran away from the initial contact and some initial blocking, which wasn't ideal on that play, to score. Ryan Eckley had kind of a tough night. His very first hold in the NFL ended up going wide right. It looked like the kick was pretty good. The kick had the great end-over-end rotation, so it might have been on the hold. I'm not really sure. And he had a doinker of a punt, a really bad one early on that went about 27 yards. So not a perfect night for him. Rayshon Benny, a couple different highlights. We'll talk about him a little later. And then Evan Berenson, he did not play in the game, and I'm not sure why. He was in uniform. It was a little surprising to me that he didn't get in there at the very end. They had cases where they had centers playing guard in there, and I would have thought that they would try to get Berenson in. He's a guy there's really no tomorrow for, being an older player who's drafted age 26 now. So I would have expected him to be getting into the game by now. Anyway, rookies, obviously significant impact on it. There's plenty of other players who returned, including some players who lost time to injury last year and made plays. So Adisa Isaac, for example, who lost the season last year, came in, and he had some good and he had some bad in the game. We'll talk about that, but he made contributions. Bilal Kone, same idea, had some good and some bad, but he made a good play on a getting downhill, and I think it was a pass play to the right side where we held him to no yards after the catch, or 1 yard after the catch. So anyway, multiple players. Emory Jones came back from last year. Emory Jones played okay. We're going to talk about him extensively. We scored his line play tonight, and we're going to get into that tomorrow on the offensive pod. But, a bunch of guys who basically lost time to injury last year. Robert Longerbeam would be another, played very well in this game. So anyway, guys coming back was a big positive for the Ravens in this one. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about scheme, context, and the things that always have to be said about a preseason game. So the context of the game obviously is such that you have a lot of second and third team players on both sides. And there's nothing wrong with a second string player beating a second string player or a 3 beating a 3, but it's not as exciting as a 1 beating a 1, obviously. And there just wasn't any of that in this game. There wasn't the Ravens sat out a huge number of players, which we probably ought to read through real quickly. So who did the Ravens sit out in this game? They said they were going to sit out a select group of established veterans. Who they actually sat out? Roquan Smith, Nate Wiggins, Chidobe Awuzie, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Lamar Jackson, Kyle Hamilton, Jalen Hawkins, Derrick Henry, Malachi Starks, Rasheen Ali, it was a matter of injury, Trenton Simpson, Teddy Buchanan, Jaquez Robinson, also a matter of injury, Justice Hill, Marlon Humphrey, Carl Jones, another matter of injury, Evan Berenson, and I don't know what the reason was for him not playing, Roger Rosengarten, Simpson, the guard, John Simpson. That may also have been a matter of injury, by the way. He was wearing some sort of a wrap at practice. Then Ronnie Stanley, Durham Smythe, Octavian Smith, definitely an injury, Mark Andrews, Trey Hendrickson, Nnamdi Madubuike, Calais Campbell, Tavius Robinson, and Travis Jones. So in short, they held out basically every veteran starter there was. And even players like Malachi Starks, who's only a second-year player, is in that group, or Teddy Buchanan, he's in that group for injury. But anyway, there are a huge number of people being sitting out this game. I would guess that only in one game, and probably it means the second, will any of these starters see any time. I don't expect Lamar Jackson to play at all. I wouldn't expect Derrick Henry to play at all. But it could be that they get the offensive line together for 1 or 2 series during the second game, and then they sit them down and they bubble wrap them until the Colts, because the preseason is now a barren wasteland of actual NFL starters, pretty much across the league. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, so that's for context. We're talking about 2s versus 2s and 3s versus 3s, generally speaking. The other thing is scheme and packages. Now, there is virtually no variation in package during the preseason. In fact, the Ravens in this game played 100% of their snaps in either the base defense or the standard nickel. Now, remember, the Ravens' bread and butter is what? It's the big nickel. So that's a third safety in there at cornerback instead of a lighter corner. They don't do that, and they didn't do that at all in this game. They had players that they could have done it with, but they were kind of short on safeties as well. So they said we'll just play base and nickel the whole time. There's other reasons they do that. Is their roster is very much composed for a number of players at each spot, and the base and the nickel, or a combination of the base and the nickel, provide enough snaps for each of those positions to get a reasonable look. So they want to have enough. They want to have enough snaps for their inside linebackers to get a look across the board, and in particular for their defensive linemen too, which really requires, 2.5 or 2.2 or 2.4 at least defensive linemen per play on average. And so they do more of the base defense, which they don't do very much in the regular season at all. You've heard me talk about it. This show in 2025 was only about 9% of the snaps. I would expect it to still be a very low number going forward under Minter. Some things are going to change, but I don't believe that'll change. And I don't really believe the Ravens fascination, that's not the right term, commitment to big nickel is going to change. They have the best player in the entire league for executing that package as effectively as you possibly can. It would seem very silly to get away from that. There are reasons that have been pointed out in terms of injury and whatnot, the additional risk to Hamilton, but he's an awfully great player. And they got a player on each side of the ball they can't afford to lose above all others. Obviously it's Hamilton on defense and it's Lamar on offense. And each of these players, I mean, you kind of hold your breath sometimes on some of the hits they take, but you also need them to play the position that they're going to have the most impact on the football game. So anyway, I expect them to stay with Big Nickel for the whole season. But this is a team that is going to play a lot of package variation, in my opinion. I think they'll kick outside linebackers inside a fair amount. Some of that will depend upon the health of Nnamdi Madubuike, but I do believe that either Young or Tavius Robinson is perfectly capable of kicking inside, so I think they'll do it some. So we'll see some 3 outside linebacker that's called a rush nickel look or a rush dime look, either one of those. I think we'll see plenty of dime. I think it'll be the prominent package, and I think they do have a small role for a slot corner to play slot corner and dime. I just don't believe that there's going to be other times where Hamilton is not hurt that they would play a regular nickel defense. So that slot corner is it's not the opportunity it is for a lot of NFL teams where you might be 85% of snaps. With the Ravens, it's more like 25% of snaps because it's only the dime snaps that you'll be in there for. So anyway, you're starting with that. You got a very limited set of packages you're playing. Now, scheme, I'm going to say, on both sides of the ball is extremely limited as well. Okay, so the one thing they do on the pass on the defensive side is rush the passer a little bit differently. On the offensive side, they don't really want to give away much of anything in the way of trickery other than the very standard plays that are in everybody's playbook. Okay, so the most common trick play you see, and I'm kind of holding up my fingers and using air quotes here as a trick play, is you see the zone block in one direction with the naked boot in the other and look for a levels concept 3-2-1 on the boot side. Okay, it is the most tired play in football, and if ever defenses ought to be alert to it, it's in the preseason when you see it just run all the time. I mean, a lot of the time, one boot is okay to keep the other team honest on your zone runs, and 2 boots is too many. And you'll often see in a preseason game that they might run 4 boots to one side, usually the dominant throwing hand side of the quarterback. So your right-handed quarterback is gonna be zone blocking to the left, and he'll do the naked boot to the right. And you'll run it one time also to the non-dominant side, just so you can get somebody free that way as well, or trick somebody that way as well. But they're not pulling out any of their good trick plays. It's this tired old garbage that has been run since the 1980s or even before that in terms of that same zone boot play. So other than that, do you ever see trickery? I'm not saying you never do in terms of some sort of pitchback or whatever. I mean, most teams do have that kind of thing in their playbook where the running back takes a handoff on kind of a dive play up the middle, then pitches it back to the quarterback, and then they go deep kind of thing. I'll occasionally see that in the preseason, but it's not something where they have just a whole bunch of trick plays they're looking to put out there. They're looking to save those for the regular season. If you're Declan Doyle, you may have 6 of those ready to go right now. You may have 14 of them ready to go right now, but you don't want to show any of them in a game like this because, hey, there's a 17-week season coming and you need to get all the way through it with some trickery, and you may already be dipping into additional plays that you're going to have to devise in order to do that. So no reason to give that up during the preseason. All right. If we look back, by the way, in terms of the defensive side of the ball, the Ravens under Harbaugh rarely played any dime or any of the more exotic packages in the preseason either. They would get out there and they play nickel and base. And in fact, I was writing my article, and one of the first things I do is I copy last year's article, and then I start to decide what do I want to keep. And I noticed that my comment about last year was that they played 100% base and nickel in that first preseason game from last year. So it's not like this hasn't happened before, or this is the same under Harbaugh and Mentors. Or the same under Doyle and Monken for that matter. It's this is the way it's done in the preseason. I would say pretty much across the NFL. So they don't give away any of the sub packages. They deal with the big group of players they have to evaluate, and they don't really care if they put their players at a disadvantage. It's not a disadvantage, it's an opportunity. It's a testing opportunity to see if these young players can figure out how to react to a situation they might not normally be put in, and how do they excel with one-on-one when they don't have some sort of specific advantage, giving them better chances than just even against their opponent. So it's something that I don't think coaches mind doing. I don't think they mind seeing the film from it. I don't think even the players mind it. But when the regular season comes, they're going to try and put their players in the best position to succeed. Right now, that doesn't mean a damn thing in a preseason game. In the regular season, it means an awful lot. You want those guys to be have every possible advantage, and that's why we'll see the Ravens return to Big Nickel. They'll have the best players on the field, and they'll do all the things they need to try and win a football game. All right. I want to talk about the coaching a little bit. All right, because the coaching is something I'm trying to figure out. What can we ascribe from a dominant victory like this to any of the changes in coaching? All right. I came up with 3 things that I think are worthy of discussion, but this is something I want to hear what you guys think. Okay. Send me something at filmstudymailbag@gmail.com about what you think is something you think you saw from the coaches that was different from what the Ravens had before. Might be worthy of an episode, might be worthy of a discussion on a future pod of this type. But in any case, I want to hear from you to see what you have. But I came up with 3 things. The first is the team was very physical. And I'm not sure that's been a failure of past teams, but I think that they've done a good job to be physical and contest the line of scrimmage on both sides. And they've done so without having to grind the players into the ground in the practices this summer so far. The practices in large part of camp have not been going full length. Have not been going full length. That's not something that Harbaugh would do. Harbaugh's occasionally called practice early because somebody got hurt. Remember when they had 2 guys lost to ACLs on consecutive plays a few years back? And Dobbins was one of them, I believe, and might have been Edwards actually that time. But anyway, they lost 2 players, and when that happened, they'll cut practice early. But it's not the normal operation. I would say that 2.5-hour practices have been going about 2 hours and 5 or 8 minutes kind of thing under Minter. And I think it's probably been good for the playoffs. It's kind of a cream puff situation. And if this team starts to lose in terms of physicality, I'm sure people are going to point to it. Anyway, that's item number 1. Number 2, we did not see a bunch of secondary breakdowns in this game. Now, to be honest, the Eagles only ran 40 plays, so it's really hard to determine. And they only ran 25 plays that got off for 26 plays, I think, got off for a pass or sack. So that's not a lot in order to have some breakdowns occur. But the closest thing they had to a breakdown, and I guess it was a breakdown in the strictest sense, is that Oruwariye was not in the right place on the touchdown pass in the corner of the end zone. He gave up that play. He's the only person who could have covered. Somehow he got himself like 3/4 of the way towards the right side in the end zone and in no man's land between a couple of different receivers. And he just wasn't in the right place. And they got the ball out to the receiver right by the back pylon on the right corner. And he made the catch. So not what you would hope, but also not a lot of breakdowns for a game like this. One way you can tell breakdowns is are the receivers making catches and then get a lot of yak after the catch? Are they wide open in a place where they shouldn't be wide open? They just didn't have any of that really in this game. And some of the places there were throws where the offense was probably at fault for the completion not being made. Either the throw was a little high or other things were going on. And some of that was pressure, but some of it was not. And some of it was timing. But there were times when the Eagles certainly didn't complete all the passes they should have, and the Ravens were just much more efficient doing that in this game. But I wouldn't say that there were a bunch of secondary breakdowns. So that's really good, and that's Mike Mickens right there, who I would point to as being the guy who has orchestrated this. And Kyle Hamilton and others have been praised him extensively, talking about him being extremely detail-oriented, a guy who teaches technique rather than being an install king. So he's not just working the defense through its paces, trying to get them to play a specific bunch of different defenses. He's trying to make them understand the defense that they're playing, understand how they get to the spot that they're supposed to get to. Mickens is very impressive, like a lot of the Ravens' young coaches, and had a wonderful record at Notre Dame of elevating that secondary to the highest heights of FBS play. So really impressive. Anyway, the third thing is Ledford's impact on the offensive line. Now, overall, I'm going to say this was a good but not great offensive line game overall. Okay. I think the game that Carson Vincent had some problems. I think Emory Jones had a lot of problems early in this game, although each of them got better as the game went on. The pass blocking was good. I wouldn't call it great. They allowed the quarterback to take a few hits in this game, and that's the unfortunate way it was. And by the way, the Eagles were doing a lot more in this game to try and get after the Ravens. The Eagles did much more in terms of stunts and blitzes and whatnot. So they faced a lot less plain vanilla 4-0 rushes from those Eagles. The 4 you show, the 4 you get, everybody stays in their lane, that kind of thing. The Eagles just didn't do that very much of that the whole game. So they got after the quarterback, and they were pretty effective doing it. And I thought Fagnano in particular did a really good job of getting the ball off on time and taking some hits as needed to deal with the pressure well. All right, but back to Ledford's impact on this. I think we did see some of Ledford's style of dealing with blitzes and stunts looking a little better than it had in the past. Now, was it great? Not really. I wouldn't say it was great. I'll talk about that more on the offensive pod, but it was a little better. Here's the biggest thing. The carry-on bag, as I've been calling him, Javon Gwynn, played center, and we're going to have much more detail on this in the offensive pod, but he was tremendous in this game. Absolutely tremendous. Pad level was outstanding. Hand placement is good. He's fairly violent, and he's the right amount of violent and a striker inside that he wasn't getting himself off balance or over his feet, which is a possibility because he doesn't have real long arms. He just did an outstanding job of being better, stronger at the point of attack. And in watching these guys play, Pinter didn't frankly look that great and had a big holding call against him. We saw that Posick was in at the end of the game. It was really hard to tell, what kind of player he's going to be. We certainly hope he's the guy he was 3 or 4 years ago, but there's not a whole lot of reason to hope for that. Gwynn is the biggest black box that ever was because he comes here with only 11 career snaps from Atlanta. But Ledford has coached him previously and likes him, and obviously thought he was the guy he wanted to bring in. And he's been lower down on the center totem pole, I would say. He's gotten fewer snaps than Pinter, certainly. After this game, I would not be surprised if that changes abruptly, if they didn't move to Gwynn being the number 1 center. So anyway, I will say that the impact of Ledford may be greater so far in terms of who he brought with him than in terms of how he coached these guys, how he's improved the level of play of the guys who were there. Andrew Voorhees kind of looked like a little bit lost at times. Lichtenhan, I thought, had a pretty good game. We'll talk about that more tomorrow night. And then, the guys who played a lot of snaps were Lichtenhan, who I didn't bother scoring, Emory Jones, Gwynn, and Vincent. Those are the guys who had, the bulk of the snaps for the Ravens offensive line. Everybody else, they played a few snaps here or there. Pinter just played 15 to start the game with. But I would say that Ledford's, bringing along Gwynn, who I thought, more of a stylistic fit probably, undersized centers, good zone blocker. That might have been why he brought him. But look, Gwynn is he's a fire hydrant at the point of attack. He's very difficult to move. And, we've watched centers get blown over by the Ravens, for the Ravens in recent years. And I really, from looking at this guy play 51 snaps, which is not the end of the world, I'm very impressed. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. All right. Let's talk about deployment order. Before you do, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after that. All right, we're back. So every year I like to take a look at deployment order. We'll go by position group here. Deployment order gives you the clearest view of what the coaches really believe that the depth chart is. Not the thing PR fills out that you wouldn't know from they have a set of mandates that they think they understand. They'll try and put something together. They also have other rules for it in terms of only having every name be there once, that they don't want to duplicate things, and that creates positional difficulties for them. And they have to create additional positions. In fact, they have 12 positions on defense, so they can fit in the additional defensive linemen. So anyway, multiple things are occurring with that chart that doesn't make it particularly useful. How these players are deployed, and particularly deployed within a very, very standard set of packages with just base and nickel being played, is a great indicator of exactly how they feel about these players. So we're going to go through one position group at a time. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what these guys did. And then in the second part of the show, we're going to talk about some of the big question marks, why some of these are question marks going into 2027, and what the Ravens maybe need to get out of the rest of the preseason to try and figure that out. All right, so we'll start at cornerback. And of course, their top cornerbacks are out. The big three of Wiggins, Humphrey, and Awuzie. So they're down. Their starting cornerbacks are TJ Tampa and Bilal Kone. Now, first of all, wasn't 100% sure that Kone would be the guy. I thought maybe Kone or maybe Robinson, who's had a really good camp, would be the corner that got to play with Tampa on the first couple series. I also didn't know how long Tampa would play, and Tampa ends up playing a few series. Let's talk about this now. Defense, good. Here's my sheet, the indispensable order of entry sheet, which has the players by when they entered and how many drives they played. But Tampa played the first 5 drives, and they actually came back for a few plays on the 7th drive for some reason. All right. So anyway, he was at one cornerback spot, and Kone was at the other for the first 5 drives only. Kone looked reasonably good coming back from the injury. So we'll start with that he wasn't a problem. They didn't go after him. He wasn't getting beat. If anything, they went after Tampa, honestly, in this game. And Kone had one nice play on a tackle where he came downhill, made it on a short play, and he had one missed tackle as well on an 8-yard run that gave Shipley an extra 4 yards, but not the end of the world. Certainly, wouldn't call it a great game, but he looked good enough, and I thought the fact that he didn't allow much in the way of coverage. Did he have one play? I think it's the one play he allowed was 4 8 yards, and it was a 7+1 when it was a long down and distance. It was 2nd and 15, 1st and 20 kind of thing, and he allowed an 8-yard play, and that was actually still right on the border of being a defensive win. So let me just see if what I've got here for him. Yeah, two plays for 21 yards. So there's a 13-yard play as well. Okay, I've got to look back into how this was. But the Eagles had several plays that were of mid-range that they got when they had long distances to go. And some of these ones where they had their holding calls and they ate up some of their yards as kind of red yards, earning back their holding yard distances, and they didn't convert those into first down necessarily. So anyway, Kone was solid, had a good play. Tampa was one of the really great players in this game. They targeted him 4 times with 1 reception for 4 yards. That will get it done. And it wasn't all he did in the game. He had other positives as well. He was in the backfield making a run stop on one play. And he, besides that, all right, I'm missing my thing here. But anyway, Tampa had several good plays in this game, and they're listed in the article, by the way. If you want to find the easiest place, go to filmstudybaltimore.com, look at the defense article for this first game, and you'll see Tampa is among the top players, and his plays are listed there in a block in what I call racing form notes. And Tampa's has 5 or 6 plays listed there, and most of them are positive since he really only gave up one pass completion as it was. So anyway, after the first two, they brought in then Longer Beam and Oruwariye. Now, the injury to Jaquez Robinson, who is a safety, may have had an impact on Oruwariye entering as early as he did. I don't believe that is his exact place on the depth chart. I believe they brought him in early at corner because they knew they were going to need him at safety since they didn't have Jaquez Robinson later in the game. I actually predicted this on the What to Look For show, was that we were going to see him at safety in this first game. And sure enough, he did end up there at the end of the game. And then Robert Longerbeam was a little bit of a surprise that he would be ahead of Marquise Robinson as well, but he was. And you know what? Robert Longerbeam had a freaking great game. And he nearly had an interception. Unfortunately, Silas Walters got his fingertip on the ball, which kind of messed it up. And he looked like he actually had the ball completely tracked for an interception and kind of a loose bracket behind a tight bracket on the receiver. Somehow the quarterback still tried to stick the ball in there, and it was Cole Payton at that point, and Walters tipped it up, and it eluded the grasp of Longerbeam. He still potentially could have caught it, but Longerbeam had some fine plays in the game. All right. Anyway, so we have Longerbeam and Oruwariye in on a second. Then the next guy, and he's really in a class by himself, is Robinson, who came in after those guys are gone. Let's see. Robinson didn't come in until the second to last drive of the game. He played with Longerbeam, and he was replacing Oruwariye. And so, it's much less playing time than I thought he probably deserved. He did play the last drive as well. At that point, he was playing with Lardarius Webb, who was the last corner off the bench. So, just probably a little bit surprising to me that Robinson was not in earlier. I think if I had to say, I think he's been a guy who's played earlier. But again, it may have been a fact that they would have had Longerbeam and Robinson in as the second group, but Oruwariye, again, needed to play safety, so they needed to kind of get him in at corner a little bit earlier. Okay, that just is the outside guys. Let's move to slot corner, where Martin and Rivers were two of the team's best players. So we had Martin start off the game, decided hat tip to Martin by the coaches, by the way. The way they've talked about Rivers, it's like he's in this very close race with Martin. Well, Martin started the game. He played the first 2.5 quarters, and then he retired, and Rivers played the last 3 drives. Martin was by far the Ravens' best player on the entire field on the night. And we'll get to the MVPs a little later, but I don't mind spoiling that particular one. He did everything in this game. He had 4 tackles. They were all defensive wins. He had both of the team's tackles for loss, including the only sack. The only thing he didn't have was really an interception. And did he allow any receptions on the day? Even that's I think he might have allowed one short one during the entire game, and 2 for 8 yards. So it was very limited in terms of what he gave up. Anyway, one of the things he really did, nice play, stopped a jet run play where he was the only line of defense the Ravens had, and he managed to stretch it to the sidelines and push him out of bounds. A very good play there. So anyway, Martin played extremely well. Then Rivers came in. Rivers also played very well, by the way. Had a big pass defense on 3rd and 3 that brought up 4th and 3 and almost, choked the life out of the Eagles. They could have kicked a field goal there potentially and just avoided the shutout, but they did the right thing and they went for a touchdown, went for a first down, and they got it. But Rivers played well, and the real question comes up of is there room for both those guys on the roster? So I think we've got the first mark in the sand has been made. The coaches are telling us that Martin is ahead of Rivers. Martin is also telling us by his play that he's ahead of Rivers. So Martin's been an absolute Tasmanian devil in camp in terms of being all over the field making plays too. So this is very impressive. In fact, one of the days recently, Rivers tipped the ball out of the hands of a receiver and into the hands of Martin, who ran it in for 6 in one of the plays that is just unbelievable competing players, assisting on a big play. But anyway, I think there's a good chance both players make the team, but it is a real retwisting of the roster they have to do to make that work, because they're really short on outside corners, and they have a guy who's already eating a lot of slot snaps for the year in Hamilton that doesn't leave a very big opportunity there. Anyway, DNPs, of course, Wiggins, Humphrey, and Awuzie. That's the cornerback group. We'll move on and talk about the safeties. It's a relatively short discussion here. Jackson and Wallace played most of the game. It came out at the end of 3 quarters, and they were replaced at that point by Silas Walters and Oruwariye. And again, that is a place where Jacquez Robinson might have been in the game normally with Walters. And I think the next game, if he's available, that's how they'll roll. But Jackson and Wallace were simply outstanding. Wallace played quite well. Didn't have a bunch of highlight plays, but he did what a safety's supposed to do. He made the tackles that came his way. In fact, a couple times he took down Shipley on an 8-yard gain. Shipley had 3 or 4 8-yard gains in this game, by the way, so it's hard to tell them apart. But Wallace made a couple of stops of that ilk where he was the last line of defense. And Keandre Jackson was terrific. He did. I think he has done so much to convince me that he's the 4th safety. I wanted it to be true, which is that's always a fear I have, is that I want something to be true, and so I'll think it's true, or I'll how people manifest things into existence. But that's not the case. So Wallace has just really outplayed everybody. He's outplayed him in camp. He's outplayed them, in the preseason game. Made a beautiful downhill play against the run. He was in position a couple of times on pass plays. I've noted this again in the article. If you want to take a look at that, but Jackson is one of the players who's looked really good. He did have a pressure in the game as well, so it's been everything. He's done tight underneath bracket of Cooper with Tampa. That was about 10 yards between the left numbers and left hash. That was in quarter 1. That was a 3rd and 6 play. Got the other team off the field. So he made big plays in this game and was one of the guys who looked good. I didn't give him a super high grade, by the way. I graded him out as a +1 in this game, and that's a change in expectations. And the reason just is pretty simple, that I already really expected that Keandre Jackson is going to be the 4th safety on this team. Nothing's going to make him be the 3rd safety on this team. The 3 safeties are very well set at the top, and they're probably the best safety trio in the entire league. Jackson, in fact, does not have a ton of competition below him, but Wallace played well in this game, as I mentioned, and he's a veteran player. It's something the Ravens could decide they want to do. It makes all the sense in the world if Keandre Jackson is one of their best special teams players, that he also be their 4th safety, save them effectively a roster spot that way, and have that be a roster spot that could be invested back at the corner position. I've said a number of times on the show that's really what I'm hoping will happen, and hopefully we'll see that. All right, let's move on. We'll do the outside linebackers next. These guys rotated throughout the game, so it's largely a case of who came in like one series later and who left one series earlier kind of thing. Mike Green was the notable exception to that. He played the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th series only, and then he was done for the game well before halftime, in fact. He had a couple of good plays. Mike Green had a nice stop on a run play. What we didn't get to see, and this is kind of unfortunate, is he didn't get to rush the passer a lot. He's only in for 4 pass plays while he was in there. And one of those, I believe he dropped the cover, and otherwise he was rushing the passer. And he did have what I called a pressure. I did look on PFF. They didn't agree. But he got around the right tackle and got right to the feet of Andy Dalton. It looked like he kind of moved him on the play. So I called that a pressure. That was relatively early in the game. And if you feel differently, that's fine. But he was pancaked on the play, kind of right at the feet, right with his hands right at the feet of Andy Dalton. And I think quarterbacks obviously don't like that anytime anything's around their feet. All right, and Zion Young was the number 2 outside linebacker. Now Zion Young, he didn't put the violence on display that we maybe have hoped for, and you've heard all kinds of people like me talking about at camp. Um, but he was in there from the very first drive of the game, and he closed it out on the last drive of the game as well. He looked good on a couple of plays. He had a nice assist on a run play, and he had uh, a screen pass in his direction, which he initially overran and bit on the action of the play, not really the play action, the action of the play. And then he had to go recover, and he ran the guy right down for what ended up being a 5-yard gain. So impressive there. It wasn't a run play. I'll tell you what he was involved in. It was a false start that he caused out of Fred Johnson. Now, Fred Johnson is an 8-year veteran. Been in the league plenty long enough not to be bothered by opposing pass rushers, even those ones that are kind of twitchy. Now, Zion Young is not twitchy; he's powerful. He's a little bit ponderous, if anything, in terms of his pass rush moves. You got to be worried about, is he going to get his hands on you for sure, but you don't have to be worried in the same way that he's going to ghost move you or cross chop you in some way that is going to be the end of you very quickly, or more likely counter or spin to the inside. I mean, I'm not saying he can't do any of those things at some serviceable level, but Fred Johnson is a tackle who has been in the league for a long time, should be able to handle that. Anyway, he false started against Zion. He's clearly trying to cheat out of his stance early to get set against him on a TPS, true pass set. So he was one of those places where you'd expect him to not have to false start, and yet he did. So decent day for Young. Didn't have the spectacular, violent, effective pass rush, and wasn't involved otherwise too many of the plays. But chasing down the screen pass to the wide receiver Covey was the one I'm talking about. Pass went from -3 +8. The play was 2nd and 17 to start with, so that was a big defensive win on the play. So it's one that is definitely a positive in Young's corner. All right, the third guy I want to talk about outside linebacker is Adisa Isaac. Now, Adisa Isaac has barely played the last 2 years. A few snaps as a rookie, and he's played a little bit in the preseason, but he's basically lost the last 2 years, which includes development and whatnot. He had a mixed bag of things here, but I think over the course of the last week, he's really helped himself in terms of where he is. He's been very physical at camp. He's been getting after the quarterback. He's had a couple sacks, maybe as many as 4 or 5 sacks in the last 5 practices, I want to say, could be attributed to Isaac. And of course, they don't take the quarterback down, so it's a lot harder to do this. They don't always blow the whistle on the play, so it's a lot harder to make judgments about sacks and whatnot. But he's been in the backfield regularly and looking really good. What he did in this game that was another step forward is he showed some Sam linebacker characteristics. And I think he dropped to cover maybe 3 or 4 times in the game. It's approximately correct. I'm not sure if it's exact. And he was fine doing that. And he actually picked up the pop-up ball from a receiver that was just in front of him. So first of all, starting with that, he's in the right position if he's there to make that play on multiple levels. First of all, he has the awareness to make a play on the ball, but second of all, he's in the right position to make the tackle of what presumably was his responsibility on the play. So lots of good about what came from that. And having a Sam linebacker, an outside linebacker who can drop to cover, particularly on the Sam side with the strong side where the tight end is in line, you really need to have that to improve pass rush flexibility. So Minter, we think, is going to be a guy who does a lot of 4 and 5 man rushes, but beyond that, there's some extra deception elements that go with that. So probably, Minter was 100% 4s and 5s in this game, by the way, but he did have some elements of deception. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later with the pass rush, but he, I think that's going to be the way that we get from Jesse this year. We'll see a guy who wants to be Spartan about numbers and be as effective as possible coming from the deception. And you just need a Sam linebacker who could drop if you're going to get free runs from inside linebacker or from slot corner, there has to be someone to take up that space and defend. And he's been okay. I mean, he's dropped Broderick Washington to cover and others, but really need a Sam linebacker who can actually do something for you. Been a long time since they've had Tyus Bowser and Matt Judon. It's been even longer. Those were guys who certifiably could play that position. Jarrett Johnson wasn't bad in it either. A player like Terrell Suggs, who played on the rush side, that was never his game. It's not that he never dropped a coverage, because he did, but it wasn't his game. Kyle Van Noy, another good one in Ravens history. So it's kind of a freaky skill set. It doesn't exist in everyone. Tavius Robinson on this current Ravens team has the speed to do it, but I'm not sure he has the instincts to get to the spot. So we'll see if he'd be the guy. But I think he's about the fastest of their outside linebackers. I looked up Adisa Isaac out of school, and I don't think he's had injuries that would affect his speed to any great degree yet. Was about a 475 guy. Zion Young was right around the same. And Hendrickson is a pure pass rusher. Mike Green probably has enough quickness to handle the position, but they'd be kind of wasting him to do that with him a lot. And I also expected mostly in on pass rush downs, where that's his job, is to really get to the quarterback on that. So anyway, Isaac looked pretty good in multiple respects. He did miss some tackles and did not play the run well in this game. I'm going to start with that. He lost the right edge on the mesh play by Peyton. And this was a lot of Peyton's runs were scrambles, but at the end of the game, he had a mesh run right 15 that it was just a whiff on the part of Isaac, primarily on that edge, to not be as wide as the widest, as Billick would put it. All right, moving on. Kamen Rucker is another guy who he played okay. Up and down game. I wasn't real crazy about how he looked in terms of boot recognition and really being right in the quarterback's face as quickly as possible. I thought he was a little slow on that. And like I said, they run the boot all freaking day in these preseason games, so you really want to be on that play. Anyway, I didn't think that was great. I wasn't involved in any special kind of way. I didn't see him have a pressure. I didn't score him for one. So there's not much I can comment on that. He also didn't have a bunch of misses in this game. So, was it an okay game? Yeah, it was probably an okay game from Rucker. But you hope for a little more pressure out of a guy who's eating a lot of outside linebacker snaps. All right, Ethan Burke. Now, he's a guy a lot of people are really high on, and I've had the question asked more than once at camp, well, who's ahead, Ethan Burke or Isaac, for that fifth outside linebacker spot? I think 2 weeks ago I would have said it was Burke. Right now, after this first game and after seeing what Isaac has done the last couple of weeks or week and a half in practice, rolling up a lot of sacks, a lot of pressures, I'd say it's pretty clearly Isaac. And I think the coaches, by their order of entry, have kind of indicated that as well. Burke didn't come until the third series rather, and played to the last. Isaac came in a series earlier and played to the last. Probably a slight tip of the hat to Isaac in terms of him being a little bit ahead on the depth chart. So, and of course, Tavius Robinson and Hendrickson did not play in this one. They were on the sidelines, and the Ravens' overall depth at the position is not particularly great. Isaac is a guy with 2 years of team control remaining. He's under contract. It's not a matter of there's an RFA year either, so it's not 1.5. And they could still go to the street and get a free agent, maybe even Kyle Van Noy to come back again, but somebody who has Sam linebacker chops. I don't know if that's going to happen. And they could also just get a pure veteran pass rusher and go that route and say, what's a Sam linebacker? Why do we need one of those, kind of thing? And it is a possibility, and something they certainly could do. Let's move on to the inside linebacker position. Jay Higgins was the starter, and the only one of the four players that I expect to make the roster who was playing at all in this game. Roquan Smith, Trenton Simpson, Teddy Buchanan. The first two because they're veterans. The third one because he remains on PUP, did not play. Higgins looked very good before he was hurt. I would have given him a higher grade, but the injury itself reduces my expectations of what's going to happen to him this year. So he started the game with DeLuca. We then saw Williford come in a little bit later. Williford had a kind of a tough game. He missed some tackles. And most importantly, he missed the sack on 4th and 3. That would have, put the lights out on the Eagles and probably guaranteed the shutout, or pretty close to it anyway. And then the last player off the bench was Jamon Johnson. He was okay. It wasn't terrible. Wasn't great, certainly by any stretch. But both of the backup linebackers, Williford and Johnson, had some difficulties. DeLuca, I thought, played pretty well, and Higgins played well until he suffered the concussion. Looked like a pretty set case that he lowered his head into kind of the shoulder of the player he's tackling, and absorbed the worst of that impact, and all of a sudden he was staggering around the field. There's basically no doubt about it what it was. You hope it's not a more serious injury, and if it's a first concussion, I don't honestly know if it's the first he's had. Hopefully it's not a big deal to come back from, and hopefully it's not something he has long-term impact from. But the inside linebacker group is fairly thin. I want to talk at the second half of the show about what the Ravens might do about that, and where they need to, how they need to figure this out, really starting this preseason. But anyway, I'm not sure they have a guy that's in camp right now that I'd say, yeah, he's a big chance to be a 2027 solution to the Ravens' inside linebacker problems. All right, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the defensive line in the second half of the show. Appreciate you guys listening as always. Send your questions to filmstudymailbag@gmail.com. If you'd like to do a short with me, that's the place to hit me up. Otherwise, I'd love to hear from you anyway. And we'll talk to you later on Film Study.